They laughed when he pushed a mop. They whispered insults when he walked by. But their smirks vanished the moment he walked into the room in uniform, because the janitor they humiliated for years is now the man in charge. Marcus arrived at the police station every morning before the sun came up. He wore the same faded blue uniform with his name barely visible on the chest. Most officers didn't even know his name. They just called him Janitor or ignored him completely. He cleaned their messes without complaint, sweeping floors, scrubbing toilets, and emptying trash cans while officers laughed, joked, and walked past him like he didn't exist. Some treated him worse than dirt. They left food on the floor just to see him pick it up. They made rude comments behind his back. A few even mocked his quiet nature, saying he looked too weak to lift a bucket. But Marcus never said a word. He didn't argue. He didn't complain. He kept his head down and did his job like it didn't bother him. Deep inside, though, he remembered everything. Every insult, every laugh, every face. What they didn't know was that Marcus was watching them more closely than they were watching each other. He noticed which officers disappeared for hours without explaining. He listened when they bragged about things that didn't sound legal. He saw paperwork vanish and evidence quietly tossed into bins. They thought he was just a nobody, someone too simple to understand what was going on. But Marcus was not who they thought he was. He had once worn a badge himself. He had trained in law enforcement, studied criminal behavior, and worked in the field longer than most of them had. But now, he was the janitor in a place filled with secrets, and he was paying attention to every detail. Every word spoken in the hallway, every careless action, every mistake. He was invisible to them, but their actions weren't invisible. To him, the same men who looked down on him had no idea what was coming. Marcus was patient. He had a reason for staying quiet all these years. And soon, they would learn that the man they thought was beneath them had been walking above them the whole time. While the officers at Central City Police Department saw Marcus as just a quiet janitor, they never once stopped to ask how or why he ended up there. They thought he was a man with no options, no education, and no real future. But the truth was far different. Years ago, Marcus had been a respected detective in another city. He had solved difficult cases, led successful investigations, and even trained new officers. But one case changed everything. He discovered corruption in his own department. Officers working with criminals, hiding evidence, and covering up crimes. When he tried to report it, they turned on him. He was pushed out quietly, with no public scandal, just silence. Many would have given up, but Marcus didn't. He knew he couldn't fight a broken system from the outside, so he found a new way in. When he applied for the janitor's job at Central City PD, he already knew this station had problems. He wanted to see it with his own eyes, from the inside, where no one would suspect him. Day by day, he learned more. He listened closely while sweeping floors outside offices. He picked up documents from trash bins and took note of what was being thrown away. Sometimes he'd clean late at night just to see who was still in the building and what they were doing. His past experience made it easy to recognize signs of misconduct: missing files, erased camera footage, odd shifts in reports. And the longer he stayed, the more convinced he became that this station needed cleaning in more ways than one. He started recording details in a private notebook. He created backups. He planned everything with care. No one questioned him. Why would they? To them, he was just the janitor, someone they didn't even bother to greet. But behind the mop and silent eyes, Marcus was building a case, not just against a few officers, but against a broken culture. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was waiting for the right moment. The moment they would realize who he really was, and what he had come to do. As months passed, Marcus became part of the background at the police station. Officers walked past him like he was furniture, never noticing how closely he was paying attention. He was always there, quiet, calm, and steady. While they joked, argued, or bragged about their latest arrests, he swept the floors just a few feet away, taking in every word. He worked during lunch hours, late shifts, and early mornings. He saw who stayed behind after hours, who left early, who they avoided paperwork, and who acted nervous around internal files. He noticed missing evidence from storage rooms, overheard hushed conversations behind closed doors, and watched officers exchange suspicious envelopes. But still, no one looked twice at the janitor. No one saw the small pen camera hidden in his shirt. No one questioned why he carried a second phone in his locker. No one realized he had backed up months of surveillance footage to a private cloud account under a false name. Marcus had become the station's shadow, always present but never seen. The few honest officers sometimes greeted him with respect, offering a smile or a kind word, but most still looked right through him. They had no idea how many rules they'd broken in front of him, how many laws they'd bent thinking no one was watching. Marcus wasn't angry. He was focused. He wasn't collecting evidence for revenge. He was gathering truth. He knew that the system was rotten, and he was tired of watching good people get pushed aside while the corrupt rose higher. For Marcus, the mop wasn't just a tool for cleaning floors. It was the perfect disguise. It gave him access to every room, every hallway, every corner of the station. It allowed him to move freely without raising suspicion. And day by day, Piece by piece, he was building something powerful. He had the files, the recordings, the names, and the timelines. The evidence was complete. All that was left was to wait for the right moment, because once the truth came out, everything in that station would change forever and they'd finally see who Marcus really was. It was an ordinary Monday morning at the station, coffee cups in hand, laughter echoing through the hallways, and the same disrespectful remarks thrown around as usual. Marcus was there, as always, quietly mopping the entrance. But, deep inside, he knew this day would be different. The night before, the police chief had submitted a sudden resignation, and the department was buzzing with gossip. No one knew who the replacement would be, and many officers expected some political puppet to take over. Just before noon, everyone was called into the main briefing room. Officers shuffled in slowly, some annoyed, some curious, none expecting much. The mayor stepped forward, flanked by internal affairs officers. His face was calm, but his voice carried weight. "This department has needed a change for a long time," he said. "Meet your new acting chief of police." And then the door opened. Marcus walked in, no mop, no janitor uniform, just a clean, sharp police chief's suit with the badge of command on his chest. The room froze. For a long moment, no one said a word. Some officers stared in disbelief. A few blinked like they were seeing a ghost. The same man they had ignored, insulted, and mocked was now their boss. One officer dropped his coffee. Another shifted nervously in his seat. Marcus didn't smile. He stood tall, looked each of them in the eye and said, "For years, I've walked these halls and watched how this department truly works. The lies, the abuse of power, the games, those days are over." A hush fell over the room. He then gestured, and internal affairs officers stepped forward with folders of reports and names. Some officers immediately recognized their own files. Fear spread like wildfire. In just minutes, suspension orders were handed out. The worst ones were escorted out of the room. Marcus didn't raise his voice, and he didn't show anger. He spoke with calm authority, and for the first time, they listened. The janitor they never respected had just taken control. The silence in the room after Marcus took control was louder than any siren. The officers sat frozen, some in shame, others in fear. The man they had mocked for years was now standing in front of them, not as a janitor, but as their new leader. But Marcus wasn't there for revenge. He was there for justice. With firm but calm words, he explained what he had seen during his time in the shadows. He spoke of fake reports, missing evidence, innocent people mistreated, and officers who had turned their badges into weapons of fear. As he spoke, the honest officers in the room lifted their heads, hope returning to their eyes. They had also seen the wrongs but were too afraid to speak out. Now they realized someone had been watching, someone brave enough to do what they couldn't. Marcus announced a full internal cleanup. Files were reopened. Body cam footage was reviewed. Anonymous complaints were no longer ignored. Officers who had stayed silent but clean were promoted to help lead the changes. For the first time in years, the department felt real accountability. The ones who had treated Marcus like garbage were forced to answer for their actions, not just in front of him, but in front of the law. Internal Affairs began interviewing staff one by one, guided by the evidence Marcus had spent years gathering. The public, once angry and distrustful of the police, began to notice changes too. Complaints started to drop. Community meetings were held. People finally felt heard. Through it all, Marcus remained steady, calm, focused, and fair. He reminded everyone that a badge is not a shield to hide behind, but a promise to serve and protect with honesty. The station that once stank of ego and corruption was slowly being cleaned, not by mops and buckets, but by truth, action, and leadership. And it all started with a man they thought was nothing, but he had turned out to be everything they needed. Weeks passed, and the station was no longer the place it used to be. The mood had shifted. The fear of being exposed was gone, not because people were hiding better, but because the corruption was being removed. Piece by piece, Marcus now walked the halls not with a mop but with quiet authority and deep respect. Officers who had once ignored him now stood when he entered the room. They called him Chief Marcus, and not just because of his badge, but because they had finally come to understand who he really was. Under his leadership, trust began to return inside the department and out in the streets. Citizens who once avoided the police station now came in to report issues and offer thanks. Community patrols were reintroduced, and officers started walking their beats again, not just riding in cars. Marcus made it clear that leadership was not about power, but about responsibility. He checked on rookies personally, reminded veterans why they wore the uniform, and made time to listen to every voice, no matter how small. But Marcus never acted proud or boastful. He stayed humble, often reminding his team that true strength isn't staying grounded. One afternoon, a young officer asked him, "Why did you choose to come in as a janitor first?" Marcus smiled and replied, "Because you learn a lot more by cleaning the dirt than sitting above it." That answer spread through the department like fire, short, honest, unforgettable. Years of pretending to be invisible had paid off. Not for glory, not for revenge, but for change. The station was no longer a place of fear and silence. It had become a place of justice, fairness, and unity. The story of the janitor who became chief became a quiet legend around the city, and every time Marcus passed by the old cleaning closet where he once stored his mop, he'd glance at it for a second, then walk on shoulders straight, heart steady, knowing he had cleaned far more than just floors. He had cleaned a broken system, and this time, he did it without ever needing to raise his voice. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. *Subscribe to Deep Wounds for more powerful stories that speak truth and inspire change.